My son tried to frame me for a crime. I know that sounds impossible, but I lived it. One minute, I was folding laundry in my quiet kitchen in Savannah, and the next, I was staring at a stranger's wallet hidden inside my sewing box planted there by my own flesh and blood. I'm not some fragile old lady who can't tell when something's wrong. I spent 30 years teaching teenagers how to read, write, and lie to their teachers. You learn things from that kind of work. How to recognize guilt in a heartbeat. How to see trouble before it sees you. That morning, I recognized both. It started on an ordinary Thursday, the kind that smelled of cinnamon and rain. I had just finished stitching the last hem on a quilt I planned to sell at the Saturday fair when Darnell showed up at my door. My son hadn't visited me in months, not since he'd asked for just one more loan that never came back. But there he was, smiling, carrying a bag of takeout fried chicken like peace could be bought in grease and salt. "Hey, Ma," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Thought I'd surprise you." I smiled back, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You sure did." He looked thinner than I remembered, eyes tired, shoulders hunched. The boy I'd once nursed through sleepless nights had turned into a man who never looked me straight in the face. Still, I invited him in. Habit, I suppose. Love doesn't disappear just because trust does. While I brewed a pot of mint tea, Darnell walked through my living room, talking too fast, asking too many questions about the neighbors, the church, my garden. I noticed how his eyes flicked toward my sewing corner, the same way a thief glances at an unlocked door. I set the teapot on the stove and turned just in time to catch it, his hand slipping something into my sewing box. The motion was quick, almost casual, like he'd done it 1,000 times. He didn't see me watching. I froze. Every instinct from decades in the classroom came rushing back. Don't react, don't accuse, not yet, just watch. When he turned around, he was smiling. "You still working on those patch quilts, Ma? Remember when you used to sew my school patches on crooked?" "You never stood still long enough for me to get them straight," I said, forcing a chuckle. We ate lunch together at the kitchen table. The air between us felt thick, full of unspoken words. He told me he was starting a business. He always had one of those, and this time it was going to change everything. He didn't ask for money, which made me even more suspicious. Darnell never visited unless he needed something. After lunch, he stood, wiped his hands on a napkin and said, "I better get going. Got a meeting across town." "Oh." I walked him to the door, pretending everything was normal. "Drive safe," I said. "Always do," he answered. That was a lie, too. I watched from the window as he backed out of the driveway in that old black Nissan of his. The taillight flickered red like a dying heartbeat. When the sound of the engine faded, I turned toward my sewing box. My heart beat so loud I could hear it echo in the quiet. For a moment, I almost didn't want to look. But I've learned that fear grows bigger when you ignore it. I lifted the lid. At first, everything looked ordinary: spools of thread, folded muslin, the same pair of golden scissors my late husband gave me our first Christmas together. Then, tucked beneath a stack of fabric, I saw it. A brown leather wallet. Old. Worn. Not mine. I picked it up carefully. My palms were sweating. Inside was a Georgia ID card, Walter Jenkins, age 78, and a Medicare card. There was a folded grocery receipt dated 3 days ago and a few crumpled dollar bills. My blood ran cold. I knew that name. Just 2 nights before, I'd read about him in the Savannah Herald. Elderly man mugged outside Family Dollar, suspect still at large. They said the attacker had fled with the victim's wallet. And here it was, in my house, in my sewing box. For a moment, I couldn't move. The only sound was the steady ticking of the kitchen clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Then, like a curtain pulling back, the truth hit me so hard I nearly dropped the wallet. Darnell had planted it there. I don't know what hurt more, the thought that he'd committed the robbery or that he thought I'd take the fall for it. Either way, the boy I raised had crossed a line I could never forgive. I sat at the table and stared at the wallet for a long time. The afternoon light streamed through the blinds, cutting across the floor in bright, lonely lines. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, as if warning me of what was coming. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. My tears had dried up years ago when my husband passed, when Darnell stopped calling, when I realized love doesn't fix broken people. Still, something inside me shifted. That soft, forgiving part of me that had always said, "He's my boy, he'll change someday," hardened into something else, something sharper, steadier. I closed the wallet, slid it back into the sewing box, and latched it shut. Then I stood, smoothed my apron, and whispered to the empty room, "You think you're the only one who knows how to play games, Darnell. You forgot who taught you." The wind outside howled against the windows, scattering the dry leaves across the porch. I looked out at the sky, streaked with the last orange of the setting sun, and felt an old, familiar calm settle over me, the same calm I used to feel right before a classroom fight broke out, because I already knew what came next. My son thought he could outsmart me. He thought I'd panic, or freeze, or call the police too soon, but I've dealt with liars before, and this time I wasn't going to lose. Not my freedom, not my name, and certainly not to my own child. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the old oak outside my window groan against the wind. Savannah in the fall was beautiful, but it could turn cold fast like people, I suppose. My house creaked with every breeze. I used to find that sound comforting, familiar. Tonight it sounded like footsteps, like secrets tiptoeing across my floor. I stayed awake long after midnight, my hand resting on the sewing box at my bedside, as if the wallet inside could whisper answers I wasn't ready to hear. Bedam, I'd made up my mind. I rose early, washed my face with cold water that stung my skin, and made a pot of strong black tea. No milk, no sugar. I needed the bitterness, needed to feel something sharp. At exactly 8 a.m., I called the church office. I told them I wouldn't make it to Quilting Circle this week. My voice was steady, polite. I didn't mention that I might be turning my son in to the police. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and the Savannah Herald folded beside me. I read the article again. The words hadn't changed. Walter Jenkins, 78, longtime member of the Holy Trinity Church, was attacked outside Family Dollar on Sycamore Avenue last Saturday afternoon. Saturday, 3 days ago. The article went on to say he'd suffered a concussion and several bruised ribs. No suspect had been identified. No witnesses had come forward, but they had his name and they had his story. And now I had his wallet. I sipped my tea, then opened the wallet again, careful not to touch more than I had to. The photo on the ID was grainy, but the man looked kind, round face, gray mustache, soft brown eyes. His address was barely 5 blocks from my house. I could have walked there. I could have knocked on his door, handed the wallet back, and told him the truth, that his attacker was my son. But that would have been foolish, dangerous even. Instead, I made a second phone call. "Carol, it's Elaine. You got a minute?" Carol Washington had been my friend since we were both 21 and afraid of our first full-time teaching jobs. These days, she worked the front desk at the precinct on Waters Avenue. "Of course I got a minute," she said. "You okay? You sound tight. I need to ask you something. Hypothetically." "Mm-hmm," she said. "This should be good." I lowered my voice. If someone finds something in their home, something connected to a crime, let's say a wallet, stolen, if it's in their house, but they didn't put it there, what happens to them? There was a pause. Then Carol's voice dropped too. "Depends on a lot of things. Who lives there? If their prints are on it, if anyone can confirm how it got there. And if they're older? Black? Live alone?" Another pause. "Elaine, you're not just making up a story, are you?" I didn't answer. Carol exhaled. "Best case? The cops believe you. Worst case? You get charged. Possession, obstruction, accessory. Even if you're innocent, it's all about the story that sticks." I hung up a minute later, after a few forced laughs and "let's get lunch soon." But my tea had gone cold. I sat there a long while. The sun had crept across the linoleum, warm and gentle, as if trying to comfort me. But all I felt was the weight of a truth I could no longer ignore. If I didn't do something, Darnell's crime would become mine. If you feel connected to this woman's strength and pain, give her a like to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Someone near you might be listening to this same story right now. I went to my sewing corner and stared at the box. It looked so ordinary, so harmless, but inside it was a future I wouldn't survive. I couldn't go to prison, not at my age. Not when I'd never even taken a library book past its due date. I needed to act. Carefully, quietly. That afternoon, I walked to the corner store where I used to buy canned peaches and detergent. I greeted the cashier, made small talk, asked if they still carried lemon drops like they used to. They didn't. But I got what I came for, a reason to ask about the incident. "You heard about Mr. Jenkins?" the cashier said. "Poor man, walked right out of here and got knocked to the ground. They say it was someone young, fast, took his wallet and ran." Any cameras?" I asked, feigning concern. He shook his head. "Just the old one, but it's too blurry. Police came by, said they don't have much to go on." I nodded, thanked him, and walked home with a carton of milk I didn't need. Back at the house, I pulled Darnell's old gym bag out of the hall closet. I placed the wallet inside, zipped it shut, and stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and dialed 911. "Savannah Police Department, what's your emergency?" "There's no emergency," I said, keeping my voice low. "But I saw something. A young man acting suspicious near a black Nissan parked on Holly Street. He was putting something in the trunk. It didn't look right." The dispatcher took the details. I hung up. Then I sat on my porch with a book I couldn't read, waiting for the sirens. I knew what I'd done, and I knew what I hadn't. I hadn't called to get my son arrested. I'd called to save myself from being destroyed by him. The sirens didn't come right away. I'd timed the call just after 2 in the afternoon, when the school buses were still running and the neighborhood was quiet. Most folks around here don't pay attention unless there's yelling or flashing lights, and I'd made sure there'd be neither. Instead, I sat on the porch with that old book from my shelf. Their eyes were watching God. I'd read it cover to cover at least 10 times, but today my fingers just flipped pages without focus. I wasn't reading. I was listening, watching. Darnell's car was still parked on the curb outside, just like I knew it would be. He always left it there when he visited, even though I told him the tires were better protected in the driveway. But he never listened. That boy never did like being told where to park or how to live. At 2:47 p.m., I saw the patrol car roll in slow down the block. No sirens, no rush. Just 2 officers in a cruiser, creeping past like a summer storm that hadn't made up its mind. They stopped 2 houses down, spoke into the radio, then circled back and pulled up beside the Nissan. I closed my book, stood slowly, and stepped inside. I didn't want to be seen watching. I didn't want to look like the neighbor who snitched, even if I'd become exactly that. From behind the lace curtains, I watched the 2 officers approach the car. A white woman, tall, lean, and a younger black man with a squared jaw and a calm walk. He had a clipboard in hand. She carried a flashlight. They examined the vehicle. Then one of them tapped on the trunk. I saw her mouth move. "Pop it," I imagined her saying. The male officer reached into his belt, pulled out a thin tool, and began working the latch. My palms were sweating. My knees felt weak, like they wanted to buckle under the weight of what I was doing. And yet, there was no turning back. With a click, the trunk opened. I couldn't see everything from the window, but I saw enough: the movement of hands, the moment one officer held something up, then leaned in to speak into his shoulder radio. They'd found it. The wallet. The bag. And Darnell wasn't even here to explain it away. I don't know what I expected in that moment. Relief, maybe. Or fear. But what came instead was something else entirely. A hollow kind of sadness. The kind you feel when you realize the only way to save yourself is by letting someone else fall. The officers stayed by the car for a while, writing things down. Then they drove off, not in a rush, but with purpose. The kind of drive that says, "We'll be back." I made myself a fresh pot of tea, poured it into the chipped mug with the faded cardinal on the side, my favorite. The one Henry gave me on our 15th anniversary, back when our lives were held together by love and faith and the smell of slow-cooked beans on Sunday. I sipped the tea and stared at the empty seat across from me. Darnell used to sit there when he was little, swinging his legs and asking questions about everything: why the sky was blue, why old people walked slow, why his daddy worked so late. I answered every question I could, and for the ones I couldn't, I made up stories. I believed if I raised him with enough love and stories, the world couldn't turn him hard. But maybe I'd been wrong. It was nearly 5 when I heard tires on gravel again. I didn't get up this time. I stayed at the table, staring into the steam rising from my cup. The front door creaked open. "Ma?" His voice was light, uncertain. I looked up slowly. He stepped in, all swagger gone. "Everything good?" I nodded. "Everything's fine. Just had some tea." "Oh?" Darnell walked over, pulled out the chair opposite mine, and sat down. I noticed his fingers twitching, like they were looking for something to hold on to. I might have left something in the car," he said, not quite meeting my eye. I sipped my tea. "You remember where I parked?" he asked. I nodded again. "You always park on the curb." He smiled nervously. "Right, just habit." There was a long pause. I watched his face, searching for signs: guilt, fear, maybe regret. But what I saw instead was calculation. He was trying to read me, same way I used to read my students when they didn't do their homework and told me their dog ate it. "I'm trying to get things right, Ma," he said finally. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm working on stuff now. Got plans. Just need a little time to sort it all." I leaned back. "That so?" He nodded quickly. "Yeah. You know, it's not easy out there. People don't give you a second chance. Even your own folks sometimes." His words were bait, and I felt the hook behind them. "Darnell," I said quietly, "why'd you come here yesterday?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why now? After all this time. After months of silence." He looked away. "I just wanted to see you. Is that so hard to believe?" "No," I said, "but I don't." There it was, a flicker of panic behind his eyes. I stood, slowly, and carried my empty cup to the sink. "You need to go home," I said, not turning around. "Dinner's not ready, and I've got things to do." He hesitated. "Ma," I said, "Goodnight, Darnell." He left without another word. I didn't watch him go this time. I stayed at the sink, staring at the empty teacup and wondering when exactly my son became a stranger. The street outside was quiet again, and the storm I knew had only just begun. The next morning came with a sky the color of bruised peaches, dull gray with hints of pink, like the kind of day that couldn't decide whether to rain or burn off into sunlight. I stood by the window with my second cup of coffee, watching the street like it was a stage and I was waiting for the next act. There were no police, no flashing lights, no commotion. Just the Paperboy's bicycle, the Jenkins twins walking their rat terrier, and Miss Bernice across the way hosing off her walkway in her robe like she did every Thursday. Everything looked normal, but I knew better. The phone rang just before 9. I picked it up without thinking. "Elaine Washington?" a deep male voice asked. "Yes, speaking." "This is Officer Langston with the Savannah Police Department. I'm following up on a report made yesterday afternoon about suspicious activity involving a black Nissan parked near your residence." I felt a jolt in my chest. He was calm, professional, maybe even friendly, but every word felt like it had teeth. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice even. "I saw a young man. Didn't recognize him. He was poking around the car. Didn't sit right with me." He paused, as if typing something. "We located a stolen wallet in the trunk of that vehicle. Belongs to a Walter Jenkins. He was assaulted earlier this week." "I read about that in the paper," I replied. "Terrible. We're trying to determine how the item ended up in the vehicle. We're speaking to the registered owner today. Just wanted to ask if you noticed anything else. Any distinguishing features about the man you saw?" I hesitated. This was it. The moment I could destroy my son or protect him one more time. "I'm afraid I didn't get a good look," I lied. "It was quick. He had a hoodie on, dark clothes, didn't look familiar." More typing. Then, "Understood. Thanks for your time, ma'am. If you recall anything else, give us a call." He hung up. I stared at the receiver a moment, before placing it back on the hook. I hadn't lied to save Darnell. I'd lied because I wasn't ready for what came after the truth. There's a difference. I spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on my sewing. I pulled out a patchwork quilt I'd been working on for months. Sunset colors, soft textures, something I'd planned to donate to the Veterans Center. My hands moved on instinct, the needle rising and falling through fabric like it knew the rhythm better than I did. But my mind wouldn't quiet. Walter Jenkins. That name echoed through my thoughts like a ghost tapping at my front door. I didn't know him, not personally, but Savannah wasn't that big. If you'd lived here long enough, you'd at least heard the names of those who stayed out of trouble and showed up for church potlucks. I made up my mind after lunch, changed into something decent, grabbed a sweater, and walked the 5 blocks to Walter's address. The house was a single-story cottage, cream-colored with blue shutters, clean porch, trimmed hedges. A small flag fluttered near the mailbox. Vietnam veteran. I didn't expect anyone to answer. I figured he might still be in the hospital, but I knocked anyway. The door creaked open, and a woman in her 40s peeked out. Yes? Good afternoon. My name is Elaine. I live down on Holly Street. I read about Mr. Jenkins. I wanted to see if he was doing all right. Her expression softened. That's kind of you. I'm his daughter, Reba. He's resting, still a bit shaken up, but he's home now. May I leave a card? Just a note to wish him well? Sure. I reached into my purse and handed her a small envelope. I'd written it that morning, before the call from the police. A simple message. Praying for your recovery. Stay strong. A neighbor. Reba nodded, then looked me over with a kind of curiosity. You a member at Holy Trinity? I used to be, I said. Years ago, my husband and I moved churches before he passed. Well, Daddy appreciates the kindness. He's been through a lot, I'm sure. Oh. We stood there for a beat, and I almost said more, almost told her the truth, or some version of it. But what could I say? That her father's pain had somehow ended up in my sewing box? I just nodded again and stepped away. On the walk home, I took a different route, one that curved past the library and the old post office. I needed time to think. I needed the rhythm of my steps to shake loose the guilt that had started to build in my chest. Back home, I stood on the porch and watched the breeze tug at the corner of the welcome mat. I reached down, lifted it, and retrieved the small spare key I kept hidden there. Security, I told myself. A small precaution. But in truth, it felt like armor. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. Then I sat at the table, opened the sewing box again, and stared into the empty space where the wallet used to be. It wasn't just a box anymore. It was a turning point, and every stitch I made from here on out would be a step deeper into a truth I couldn't unmake. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the front windows in gold, I found myself rearranging the living room for no reason. I fluffed the cushions I hadn't sat on all day, wiped a perfectly clean table with a damp cloth, and straightened the framed photos on the mantel, one of Henry in his Navy uniform, one of Darnell at his 5th grade spelling bee, smiling gap-toothed and proud. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the creak of the house seemed to hesitate, as if it too was holding its breath. At 6:42 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Not the frantic kind that comes with emergencies, just 2 firm raps, measured and polite. I froze, cloth still in hand, heart skipping once, twice. I opened the door slowly. Officer Langston stood on the porch, tall and solid in his uniform. He removed his hat politely, his expression calm but serious. "Evening, miss. Washington," he said. I nodded. "Officer, you're working late." "Comes with the job," he said. "Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside. "Of course." He walked in and looked around, taking in the neatness, the scent of baked apples lingering from a candle on the counter. "Nice place," he said. "Thank you. Built it with my husband. He passed 10 years ago." Langston nodded, his voice gentler. "I'm sorry to hear that." We sat down across from each other at the dining table, the very place I'd stared down my son 2 nights before. "I wanted to follow up on a few things," Langston said, pulling out a small notepad. "Mind if I ask you a few more questions?" "Go ahead." He flipped a page. "Do you know a Darnell Washington?" The name hit like a crack of thunder across a quiet field. I kept my face still. "Yes, he's my son." Langston looked up, then nodded. "That Nissan outside is registered to him." "Yes." Is he staying here?" "No, he stops by sometimes. Has a key but doesn't live here." Langston was quiet a moment. "Miss Washington, I'll be honest with you. The stolen wallet we recovered from his vehicle links him directly to the Jenkins case, but without a clear chain of custody, it's circumstantial. That's why I'm here." I folded my hands in my lap. "You're looking for context." "Exactly." I took a breath. "I didn't know it was in his car, but I found it in my home, in my sewing box, a day before you arrived." Langston's eyebrows lifted. "And you didn't report it?" "I was afraid," I said. My voice didn't shake, but my throat tightened. Afraid they'd blame me, that no one would believe an old woman didn't know what was in her own house. He didn't write anything for a moment, just studied me. "Why would your son hide it here?" he asked softly. I looked down at my hands, the knuckles swollen with age and work. Because he thought I'd protect him, that I'd keep my mouth shut like I always have. Langston was silent for a while, the kind of silence that has weight. "Miss Washington," he said, "I'm not here to put you in the middle, but I need the truth. If your son brought that wallet here, it matters. And if you turned it over or called it in anonymously, it could help us understand what we're dealing with." I raised my eyes to his. "I did what I had to do. I wasn't going to let that man go without justice, but I wasn't going to hand my son over like he was garbage either." Langston nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then he said, "We'll be bringing Darnell in for questioning tomorrow. Voluntarily, for now. I thought you deserved to know." "Thank you," I said. "Truly." He stood, tucked his notebook away, and replaced his hat. "Can I offer you something?" I asked. "Tea? Coffee?" He smiled just slightly. "Another time." After he left, I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, the weight of everything sinking into my bones. I had told the truth, at least part of it, enough to start the next chapter of this reckoning. That night, I didn't touch my sewing, didn't light a candle or play the jazz records Henry used to love. I sat in the dark with the sound of my own breathing and let the full truth settle into place. Tomorrow, my son would sit across from men like Langston and answer for what he'd done. And for once I wouldn't be there to protect him. The next morning broke heavy and gray, clouds thick like wet wool hanging over Savannah. I knew what the day would bring before I even stepped out of bed. The air carried it tight, quiet, and unkind. I made breakfast out of habit, not hunger. A piece of toast, 1 egg over medium, and a lukewarm cup of instant coffee. I barely touched it. My hands trembled just enough to spill a little on the counter, and I didn't even bother wiping it up. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. It wasn't Darnell. It was the precinct. "Miss Washington, this is Officer Langston. I wanted to let you know your son came in voluntarily this morning. We've begun questioning." My chest felt like it was made of glass. Did he bring a lawyer?" "He declined, says he didn't do anything wrong and doesn't need one." I let out a bitter breath. That sounded like him. Proud, stubborn, and always convinced he could talk his way out of anything. "I thought you'd want to know," Langston said. "I do," I replied quietly. After I hung up, I didn't sit down. I paced. I dusted things that didn't need dusting. I opened and closed the refrigerator 3 times without taking anything out. I pulled out my sewing kit, laid out the quilt, and just stared at it. There was nothing else to do. By noon, the anxiety had twisted into something sharper. Guilt. Maybe I should have warned Darnell, given him a chance to come clean, told him the police knew. But I hadn't. And now he was sitting in an interrogation room, likely thinking his downfall had come from bad luck, or nosy neighbors not from me. The phone rang again at 2:37 p.m. "Elaine?" came a voice I recognized immediately. "Carol." I straightened in my chair. "I heard," I said. "He's not saying much," she said, "but they've got enough. Fingerprints on the wallet, timeline matches, and, well, you know what they suspect." "What?" "That this isn't his first time." My stomach dropped. "No, that can't be right." Carol hesitated. "They're connecting dots. There've been a few similar assaults. Older victims, no cameras, same area, same pattern. He may have slipped through before." I closed my eyes. Jesus. "Elaine, I'm sorry. I didn't want you to hear this from the news. Or worse, the streets." I opened my mouth, then closed it. What could I say? That I'd suspected but hoped I was wrong? That I thought Darnell was better than this, that maybe he was just lost, but not cruel? After we hung up, I went to my closet, pulled out the old tin box with Henry's flag and medals, and sat down with it at the kitchen table. I used to take it out when I missed him, but today was different. I wanted to remember what it looked like when a man stood for something. Henry hadn't been perfect. He drank too much in his final years, and he didn't always say the right things. But he'd have never robbed an old man, and he'd have never dragged me into his dirt. I imagined him sitting across from me now, folding his weathered hands over the table, looking me straight in the eye. "You know what to do," he'd say. And I did. I just didn't like it. Later that evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Darnell's been released. No formal charges yet. He's on his way." My heart kicked against my ribs. I stood, paced, then sat again. I debated locking the door, pretending not to be home. But that wasn't me. That wasn't how I'd raised Darnell either, even if he'd forgotten everything else. At 6:03 p.m., the front door creaked open. He walked in without a word. No swagger this time. No smirk. Just tired eyes and slumped shoulders. "You knew," he said. "It wasn't a question." I nodded. "You called the cops." "Ugh." I didn't answer. He scoffed, running a hand over his face. "They had everything. My prints. Some timeline garbage. Said it's not the first time. You tell him that too?" "No," I said firmly. "I didn't have to." He sat down hard at the table, the same place Henry used to read his morning paper. He looked smaller than I remembered, like some part of him had deflated. "I didn't mean to hurt him," he muttered. "I didn't even push him that hard. He just fell. Darnell." My voice cracked. "You stole from a man who could barely walk." He looked up, angry now. "You don't know what it's like out there. You sit here in this house, with your candles and quilts, like everything's fine. It's not fine. People like me, we don't get chances. We get used up." I slammed my hand on the table. "Don't you dare talk to me about chances. I gave you everyone I had. I worked double shifts, sold your father's tools to pay your bills, took you back every time you messed up." He went quiet. "I didn't do it to make you feel guilty," I continued, softer now. "I did it because I believed in you. But now, I don't even recognize who you are." He stared at his hands, shame crawling across his face like dusk creeping over the sky. "I didn't think you'd turn on me," he whispered. "I didn't," I said. I turned toward the truth. "There's a difference." We sat there in silence, the kind that hums louder than shouting. When he finally stood, he didn't say goodbye. He just walked out the same way he'd come in, quiet, broken, and leaving behind a mother who still loved him, but didn't know how to save him anymore. 2 days passed. No word from Darnell. The house felt different now, emptier somehow, even though he'd only been there for minutes. I found myself listening for his footsteps in the hallway, half expecting the sound of the front door creaking open again, as it always did when he showed up unannounced and full of half-lies. But there was nothing. Just the familiar stillness of my own company. On Sunday morning, I dressed for church, not out of habit or guilt, but because I needed strength, the kind you can only borrow from a community of people who've survived heartbreak and still keep showing up. Mount Hope Baptist was only 6 blocks away, but I drove. My knees had been bothering me, and my heart felt heavier than it had in years. When I stepped into the sanctuary, the smell of wood polish and old hymnals wrapped around me like a memory. I hadn't been here in months, maybe a year. Some faces turned with surprise, others with soft smiles. Sister Geraldine grabbed my hand before I could even sit down. "Elaine Washington, is that really you?" she whispered, her voice warm with delight and concern. "You look like you've been carrying something heavy." I squeezed her hand. "I have." She didn't pry, just nodded and guided me to the pew beside her. The choir sang "His Eye is on the Sparrow," and for the first time in weeks, my eyes filled with tears, not from fear or anger, but from the gentle comfort of knowing I wasn't invisible. I let the music wash over me, each note peeling away layers of silence that had settled on my skin. After service, I lingered in the fellowship hall, sipping a weak cup of coffee and avoiding too many questions. But before I could slip away, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Reba Jenkins. "Miss Washington," she said, her face lined with worry. "Can we talk a moment?" I nodded, already bracing myself. We stepped outside into the cool autumn breeze. "I don't want to overstep," she said. "But my father, he remembers something now, from the night he was attacked." I held my breath. He said the man who hit him said something strange, called him Mr. Franklin in a mocking way. My dad corrected him, told him his name was Jenkins, but the man laughed, said, "All you old men look the same to me." I closed my eyes. Darnell used to say the same thing when he was a teenager about his teachers, about his bosses. They don't see me, he'd say. So why should I see them? Reba continued. The police think it might help narrow things down, but my dad wanted me to tell you first. Said he thinks you know something, and if you do, he hopes you'll help. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My throat felt thick. Miss Jenkins, I said softly, your father didn't deserve what happened. No one does. And I want to help. I really do. But sometimes, helping means tearing something apart before you can build anything better. She nodded. I understand. And if you ever need to talk, I'm around. After she left, I stood there in the church parking lot, wind tugging gently at the edges of my scarf. I knew what I had to do. That afternoon, I drove to the small office space behind the community center where a retired lawyer named Nathan Bishop kept part-time hours helping locals with wills and housing issues. I'd taught his daughter in 10th grade, and I knew he still remembered me. When he saw me walk in, he stood up from his desk, startled but smiling. Elaine, Lord, it's been a while. What can I do for you? I sat down, folded my hands, and looked him square in the eye. I need to talk to someone about legal protection, not for me, for my house, my belongings, my will. I want everything locked down. His brows furrowed. Are you in trouble? No, I said, but my son is, and I need to make sure he can't take anything else from me ever again. Bishop was quiet a moment, then nodded. I can help with that. We went through paperwork for over an hour. Trusts, titles, power of attorney. I signed things with a steady hand. For the first time in days, I felt something close to control. When I left his office, the sky had turned a dusty gold, and the wind had picked up. I pulled my sweater tighter and walked to the car with a strange kind of peace blooming in my chest. Darnell would come back, I knew, whether for money, for shelter, or to spin another story. But this time I'd drawn a line, and this time it would hold. That night, I sat down with my journal, an old habit I'd let go of for too long, and wrote the words that had been clawing at the inside of my mind. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them ruin you. It means knowing when to let go, even when it hurts. I didn't hear from Darnell for 5 more days. 5 long days of silence that stretched across my chest like wire-tight, sharp, waiting to snap. Every time the phone rang, I braced. Every time someone knocked at the door, I froze. But it wasn't him. It was never him. Instead, I filled the time. I finished the quilt for the Veterans Center. I reorganized the pantry, alphabetized the spices, cleaned out the shed out back that Henry had filled with rusty tools and old hopes. I kept moving because stillness brought thoughts I wasn't ready to face. And then, on the 6th day, just after sunset, he came back. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of collard greens, the steam rising into the warm yellow glow of the overhead light. The front door didn't creak like usual. Instead, I heard the screen slap and the knob turn slow, hesitant. He didn't knock. He never did. When I turned around, he was already in the hallway, half shadow, half boy I used to sing lullabies to. Ma, he said softly, I need to talk. I looked at him, really looked. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, his shoulders slumped like he'd been carrying more than just his guilt. He was thinner than the last time I'd seen him, as if the weight of his decisions had started to eat him from the inside out. I nodded toward the kitchen table. Sit. He did. Wordless. I ladled a bowl of greens and cornbread, set them down in front of him, and watched him eat. He didn't thank me, but he didn't need to. The silence between us was thick enough with history, with everything we weren't saying. When he was halfway through, he put down his spoon. I didn't come for money, he said. I didn't think you did. I know you talked to the police. I figured it out. Officer Langston said they had an anonymous tip, but I know your voice when I hear it. I said nothing. He looked at me then, eyes softening. I was mad at first, real mad. Felt like you turned your back on me. But I sat with it for a few days, and I realized maybe you were the only one who ever told me the truth. I swallowed hard. You ready to tell me yours? He nodded slowly. I did it, he said. Not just Mr. Jenkins, the others too. I thought I could get away with it. I picked people who looked weak, who wouldn't fight back. I hate saying that, but it's true. I didn't flinch, though the words burned. I needed the money, I was living out my car, couldn't get a job. People see a record, and they shut the door. And I was too proud to ask for help. "So you took from people who had even less," I said quietly. He looked down. "I was wrong," he whispered. "Yes, you were." We sat in silence again. The kitchen clock ticked loud, reminding me of the hours I'd spent here watching life pass through this room. Birthdays, burnt dinners, fights, laughter, grief. He cleared his throat. "I turned myself in this morning. Gave them everything. The other names, the dates, all of it." I blinked. "You what?" "They offered a deal if I cooperated. Might still do time. Might not, depends." I leaned back. "Why?" He looked up, eyes red but clear. "Because you were right. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them ruin you, and I guess I don't want to ruin myself either." My chest ached. "I'm not asking for anything," he added. "I know I don't deserve much, but I needed you to know. You're the reason I did it, not for forgiveness just. Because you believed in me when I didn't." I reached across the table and took his hand. It was rough, cold. "I still believe in the boy I raised," I said. "I don't know who this man is yet, but maybe now he has a chance." He nodded, silent tears sliding down his face. That night, he stayed on the couch. I made him a blanket pallet like I used to when he was sick as a child. I didn't ask if he'd stay long, didn't ask what would happen next. But for the first time in a long while, I went to bed without fear. He had told the truth, and so had I. Morning came with the softest light, gold and quiet, like the sky was holding its breath. I stepped onto the porch with my cup of coffee, wrapped in Henry's old cardigan, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and Old Spice. I hadn't worn it in years, but something about Darnell sleeping on my couch stirred memories too old to ignore. He was still asleep, curled up under the blue quilt I'd made the winter Henry passed. That quilt had seen more grief than joy. Now it cradled a man who had once been a child I swaddled against the cold. The street was waking up slowly. Miss Bernice was already out, clipping her rose bushes in that pink robe she never replaced. The Jenkins twins jogged by with their dog, and the bus rumbled down the block. Life moved on, same as it always did, even when yours felt paused. I sat on the top step and let the warmth of the mug seep into my fingers. The screen door creaked behind me. Darnell stood there, rumpled and still half asleep, looking younger than he had in years. Like the weight of truth had stripped away all the false confidence he used to wear like armor. "You always up this early?" he asked. "Habit?" I said. "Old bones don't sleep in." He stepped out and sat beside me. The silence between us was different now. Less about fear. More about choosing words carefully, like laying bricks on a bridge you weren't sure would hold. "I forgot how quiet this street is," he said. "You used to ride your bike up and down it until dark." He chuckled. "Used to scare the hell out of Mr. Pennington's cat." I smiled, then took a sip. "He still complains about you." He looked at his hands. "I'm going to go to that meeting this week. You know, the group for guys trying to get clean, get jobs. Officer Langston gave me the address." "Oh." I turned toward him surprised. "You sure?" He nodded. "I need to do more than just confess. I need to change." There it was again, that glimmer. That flicker of the boy I raised, the boy who cried when his turtle died and gave his lunch to a hungry kid in 4th grade. "I'm proud of that choice," I said. He stared at the street, eyes glassy. "I don't expect you to be proud of me. Not yet. I don't love you for who you were. I love you because you're trying." He didn't answer, but I saw his shoulders lift just slightly, like he could finally breathe a little easier. That afternoon, we drove to the store together just like we used to. I needed flour and canned peaches for a cobbler, and he carried the bags like he always had, without me asking. It felt almost normal. On the way back, he asked, "Do people know what I did?" I kept my eyes on the road. Some might. Savannah's small. But most? They're too wrapped up in their own troubles. He nodded. "You think they'll forgive me?" "That's not the question," I said. "The question is, can you forgive yourself?" He didn't respond. We spent the evening in the backyard cleaning out the old shed. It had been Henry's space once, tools, fishing rods, things that hadn't seen daylight in years. Darnell found an old box of photos and brought them inside. We sat at the kitchen table, flipping through faded memories. Darnell stopped at one of him on Henry's shoulders, both of them laughing, sun bright on their faces. "I remember that day," he said. "We went to Tybee Beach. You got stung by a jellyfish." He laughed. "I cried so hard they gave me 2 ice creams." I looked at the photo. "Your daddy loved you, you know." "I know," he said softly. "I just wish I'd lived in a way that honored that." "Now's your chance," I said. Before bed, he hugged me tight, like he used to when monsters lived under the bed and only Mama's arms could keep them out. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. That night, I lit a candle for Henry. And for the first time in years, I whispered a prayer not just for peace but for hope. The next morning began with the sweet smell of cinnamon rolls. I hadn't made them in years, not since my church's Mother's Day brunch back in 2013, but something in me woke up with the urge to fill the house with warmth. Real warmth, not just heating vents and polite silence. The kitchen felt alive again, the radio playing soft gospel while the dough rose and the glaze bubbled gently on the stove. I found myself humming along, hips swaying slightly, like the woman I used to be before the weight of motherhood turned every motion into duty. Darnell came in wearing one of Henry's old flannels. It hung on him like borrowed time. "Something smells like a memory," he said with a sleepy grin. "Don't get sentimental yet," I replied, sliding the pan into the oven. "You haven't had to do the dishes." He chuckled and leaned against the counter. "You sleep okay?" I did. First time in a while. "Me too." We sat down to eat together, plates warm and sticky with icing. It was quiet, but not heavy, the kind of silence that comes from shared gratitude rather than unspoken resentment. After breakfast, I handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "The group meeting. Directions, contact name, start time." He opened it, eyes scanning the neatly written note. "You did this for me?" "I did it for both of us." He nodded slowly, tucking it into his pocket. Before he left for the meeting that afternoon, I watched him from the porch head down, hands deep in his coat pockets. He walked like a man trying not to attract attention, but also like someone who'd finally decided to stop running. I stood there long after he turned the corner, the wind tugging at the edge of my sleeve. I wasn't sure if he'd come back, but I hoped he would. Later that day, I ran into Reba Jenkins at the grocery store. She was in the produce aisle, comparing pears like it was a moral decision. When she saw me, her face shifted somewhere between kindness and caution. "Miss Washington, Reba." We stood there a moment, unsure whether to speak like acquaintances or adversaries. "My father's doing better," she offered, still sore, but he's back to fussing about the mail being late, so that's a good sign. I smiled. "Glad to hear it." "Oh." She hesitated, then asked, "Your son, how's he doing?" I told her the truth. "He's trying," I said. "He went to a meeting today. Might go to more. He's telling the truth now. That's new." She nodded, lips pressed. "That's good." We moved past one another, but she turned back before reaching the onions. "You know my father. He never hated the man who hurt him. That's what he said. He just didn't want to be forgotten. Said when people ignore you, it's like they're slowly erasing you." I swallowed hard. "No one deserves that." She looked at me gently. "No, they don't." When I got home, Darnell was already back, sitting on the front steps with a folder in his hands. Inside were pamphlets, a name badge, and a schedule. "How was it?" I asked, sitting beside him. He shrugged. "Hard, good, weird. First time I've been in a room where nobody was pretending." "You going back?" "Yeah," he said. "I think I need to." Quote. We sat there until the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the yard. "Ma?" he said after a while. "Yeah? Do you think I'll ever be somebody you're proud to talk about again?" I turned to him, my voice steady. "I'm already proud you came back," I said. "Now give me more reasons to stay that way." He smiled. Not the cocky grin of a man hiding shame, but the soft, unsure smile of someone trying to become better than their past. That night, I marked the calendar with a small heart on the date October 15. The day he took his first real step toward becoming a man again. I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window where I could watch the golden leaves drift across Holly Street and feel the wind whisper secrets. The house felt different now, too, quiet maybe. Even the clock seemed to tick slower, like it knew everything had changed. I brewed my tea strong today, and I sipped it slowly, trying to steady the tremor in my heart. Darnell wasn't home yet. He had a meeting, then an appointment with the legal aid they connected him to. I watched his black Nissan pull out this morning, the engine rumbling like a worn heartbeat, and I realized I was breathing again only because I had to. Not because I was free, but because I had made a choice. The phone rang just as I set my mug aside. It was Carol. "Elaine, we need you to come in." Her tone was businesslike. No small talk. I stood and walked out the front door into the crisp October air. The leaves crunched under my tennis shoes. Henry used to call them nature's applause. I didn't cheer. At the station, Officer Langston met me in the waiting room. He offered coffee. I declined. He led me to a small interview room with a table, 2 chairs, and a single overhead light that flickered just once when we entered. The kind of light that says somebody's being watched. "Miss Washington," Langston said quietly, "thank you for coming on short notice." He slid a folder toward me. Inside were photos, vehicles, parking meters, a figure getting out of a black Nissan on Sycamore Avenue. He didn't need to point out the car. I recognized the dented rear bumper, the faded sticker. Holly Street alumni. "My son's car," I said softly. "That's right." He leaned forward. "We've been reviewing your son's case. Turns out this isn't an isolated incident." My heart sank deeper. "Tell me." "There have been at least 3 other wallet thefts in the area. Older victims, quiet neighborhoods, no witnesses. Each time the suspect drove off in a Nissan. Black, late model, same neighborhood pattern." He closed the folder. "We found matches in clustering. Your involvement has thrown things into clearer focus." I exhaled. "You think he did it?" Langston didn't answer right away. Then, in full calm, he said, "Yes, and we think your son's been using your home as a safe drop location." I stared at him, felt a cold crack in my chest. The place where I'd stitched quilts, brewed tea, waited for Sunday potlucks, it had become part of his scheme. "You understand the implications?" he asked. "I do." He paused. "You also understand that by telling us what you did moving the wallet, alerting 911, you've helped us build a stronger case." My throat tightened. "I had to protect myself." He nodded. "I know, but you protected others too. That matters." I left the station with a folder of documents and a list of dates. On the drive home, I kept the radio off. I didn't want someone singing when my mind was already humming with regrets and revelations. When I walked in the front door, Darnell was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. I could smell coffee from his mug, bitter and warm just like the one I drank 2 hours ago. "Ma," he looked up. His eyes were red but awake. "They're saying I used the house." I nodded. "I know." He leaned back. "I didn't think you'd do that. I thought you'd just stand by me." I reached out and placed my hand on his. "Standing by you doesn't mean standing silent when you're hurting others." He closed his eyes and looked older than his 32 years. "I was scared, Ma, and it made me mean. What you were is not what you must become," I said. He blinked. "What I must become?" "A man who lives with his own truth," I said with more firmness than I meant. "Not the one you've been hiding behind." He nodded slowly, and there, in the soft light of the kitchen, I felt like we were both at the same turning point. Not perfect, not healed, but at least heading the right way. That night, I didn't go to bed feeling lighter, but I went with better aim. I had drawn a line, and I would keep walking it. That morning, I opened the attic. It wasn't because I was looking for anything specific. It was because I needed to feel the weight of the past to sort it, lift it, hold it in my hands and decide if I was finally ready to let some of it go. The attic smelled like forgotten decades, dust, cedar, and time. I hadn't been up there since before Henry passed. The stairs creaked louder now, like the wood was remembering too. I pulled the chain on the lone bulb, and light spilled across boxes labeled with fading ink, Christmas, school papers, Henry, Navy. 1 Reed Darnell, 1990, 2005. I pulled it toward me. Inside were pieces of a boy I had once known well, old soccer cleats with cracked leather, drawings of dinosaurs, report cards with uneven grades, and teacher notes like, "bright but distracted." I found a letter from his 8th grade teacher that began, Darnell shows promise, if only he believed in himself. I sat there for a while, the box beside me, the light bulb swinging slightly overhead. The weight of love is strange, it doesn't always feel soft. Sometimes it's heavy, rough around the edges, stitched together with pain and forgiveness. When I came back downstairs, Darnell was at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes without being asked. "Where were you?" he asked. "In the attic, visiting ghosts." He turned off the water and dried his hands on a towel. "I thought about going out today. See if anyone needs yard work, maybe check in at the shelter, ask if they're still hiring in the kitchen." I raised my eyebrows. "Since when do you ask for kitchen work?" He shrugged. "Trying something new." I smiled. "Wear a clean shirt." Later that day, I sat on the porch again, watching the world go about its business. Mr. Haney walked by with his dog, tipped his hat, and gave me a long look, a mix of concern and respect. He hadn't said a word about the rumors. No one had. But they were there, floating in the breeze, tucked behind polite smiles. By late afternoon, Darnell came home with blisters on his hands and dirt on his jeans. "I raked Miss Dottie's yard," he said. "She tried to pay me in pie." I laughed. "That's currency around here." "Best I've ever had," he admitted. We sat for a while, watching the sky blush with sunset. Then he said, "Ma, I've been thinking about Dad." I didn't respond. I just waited. "You think he'd be ashamed of me?" The question cracked something inside me. I looked out at the fading day, the way the light clung to the leaves. "I think," I said slowly, "he'd be angry at what you've done. But ashamed? No. Shame dies when someone decides to change. And you're trying." He nodded. "I miss him." "So do I said, my voice low. That night, I gave Darnell the letter from his 8th grade teacher. He read it twice before setting it down gently. "Maybe it's time I start believing in myself too," he whispered. "You're not that boy anymore," I said. "But the man you become? He still gets to choose what he does with that promise." And in that small, quiet moment, something shifted. A kind of thaw between us. He had a long road ahead. I knew that, so did he. But now, he wasn't walking it alone. The knock came at dusk. I had just set a pot of chili on the stove and was wiping down the counter when I heard it 3 short raps, polite but firm. Darnell was in the backyard, trying to coax life back into the old tomato beds. He'd been out there since lunch, dirt under his nails and sweat across his brow. It was the kind of labor that didn't pay much, but paid in other ways. I opened the door, expecting a neighbor or maybe someone from the church. It was Officer Langston. He stood tall in his uniform, his eyes kind but serious. "Evening, Miss Washington. May I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. My heart began to thud, a low drumbeat of warning. We sat in the living room. He declined coffee, but I made some anyway, something to fill the silence, to give my hands something to do. "Is it about Darnell?" I asked finally. Langston nodded. "Yes, ma'am. There's been a development." I braced myself. "We've received a statement from a man named Percy Harlan. You may not recognize the name, but he runs a second-hand repair shop off Lanier Street." I furrowed my brow. "I've driven past it. 2 days ago, he came forward with surveillance footage, blurry, but usable. It showed a black Nissan pulling into his lot just after dark on the night of the Jenkins incident. I didn't say anything. He claimed someone came in to sell a gold watch. Said it was a family heirloom. Claimed it belonged to a sick uncle." My stomach dropped. The watch matched the description of one stolen from Mr. Jenkins. Percy didn't realize until he saw the flyer the next day. He sat on the footage, wasn't sure what to do. But after he saw your son's face on the local news, he made the connection. I closed my eyes. Is this going to be enough to press charges?" Langston hesitated. "It strengthens the case, and it could break the leniency deal we discussed." I felt heat rise in my chest. Not anger, just that slow boil of heartbreak that comes when you realize someone you love hasn't hit bottom yet. "I thought he was changing," I whispered. Langston nodded gently. "I believe he wants to, but habits don't change in a week. They test you first." I stared out the window, watching the wind stir the leaves. "I'll tell him," I said. Langston stood. "He may deny it, he may not, but you're doing the right thing." After he left, I didn't call Darnell in right away. I let him work in the soil a little longer, let him finish the row, let him believe for a moment longer that the past wasn't always waiting just outside the fence. When he finally came in, hands streaked with earth, he smiled. "I think we're going to get tomatoes this year." I nodded. "I hope so." We sat down at the kitchen table, just like always. And then I told him. He didn't yell, didn't curse, just stared at the floor like it had betrayed him. "I didn't sell that watch," he said. "I swear to you, they have footage. It wasn't me." "Then who?" He didn't answer. Silence stretched, sharp and long. "I want to believe you," I said, "but you've lied before." He looked up, his eyes wet. "Ma, you said you believed in the boy I used to be. What if I'm trying to be him again?" "I do believe in that boy," I said, "but I need the man in front of me to stop running from the truth." He pushed back his chair and stood. "I'll go see Percy myself." I raised an eyebrow. "And what will that solve?" "Maybe nothing," he said, "but I can't keep letting the world write a story I'm not telling." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. This time, I didn't stop him. Because sometimes, letting them go is the only way they find the way back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the old clock in the hallway tick through each hour like it was trying to remind me that time, no matter how painful, keeps moving. The house creaked in all its usual places: roof, pipes, the baseboards by the front window, but Darnell's footsteps never came back up the porch. By sunrise, I still hadn't heard a word. I poured my coffee and sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from me, the one he always slouched into like he didn't owe the world anything. Now, even that absence felt like punishment. Then, just before noon, the screen door creaked. I didn't jump. I just waited. Darnell stepped inside, eyes bloodshot but dry. He looked like someone who'd fought a storm barefoot and was still deciding whether to sit down or run again. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. He took the seat, leaned back, and exhaled slowly. "I went to Percy's," he said. "And?" He rubbed his hands together. He recognized me, told me I was the guy. No doubt in his mind. My breath caught. "And you?" I told him I wasn't. I asked to see the footage. "And?" He met my eyes. "Ma, it was me. I didn't remember it at first, but when I saw the clip, the way I walked, the way I scratched the back of my neck, those little things you don't forget about yourself, I saw it and I knew." Silence settled between us like ash. "I lied to your face," he said. "Again." I said nothing. I was trying to decide which was heavier, disappointment or grief. "But I stayed," he continued. "I didn't run. I asked him what it would take to make it right." He blinked. "What did he say?" "He told me it's not about him. It's about Mr. Jenkins. The cops already have the footage. He gave it to them. He didn't want money, just the truth." "So now what?" He sat straighter, voice calm. "I called Officer Langston on the walk home. Told him I was ready to accept full charges. No plea, no deal." I stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the street where the mailman was making his usual rounds. Life kept moving, even when yours shattered. "Ma," Darnell said from behind me, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm done hiding." I turned back to him. "And what are you going to do now?" "I'm going to court," he said. "Then I'm going to serve whatever time they give me. And when I get out, if I get out, I'll try again. From scratch." There was a stillness in his voice. Not fear, not pride, just resolve. He stood and walked toward the door. "You going alone?" I asked. He paused, hand on the knob. "I was hoping you'd come," he said, "even if you sit in the back." I nodded once. "I'll be there." He didn't smile, just nodded back like it was the only thing he could trust. When the door closed behind him, I felt something shift inside me, not a crack, not a tear, more like a stitch pulled tight, not healing yet, but holding. That afternoon, I pulled out a pen and paper. I wrote a letter to the Jenkins family, not an apology from me, but a note of acknowledgement. A note that said, "We see you." A note that said, "We're trying to make this right." I mailed it before I could change my mind. Later that evening, I sat in the backyard watching the wind rustle the tomato vines. They hadn't sprouted yet, but the soil was dark and rich, the kind you could build something from. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. I'd only been in one a few times in my life, once for jury duty, once for a neighbor's divorce hearing, but this was different. This time it was my son standing in front of the bench, hands behind his back, head bowed like a man walking into a storm of his own making. I sat 3 rows behind him, not too close, not too far, close enough to be a mother, far enough to let him stand alone. Darnell wore a button-down shirt I'd ironed the night before and slacks that were too loose, like he hadn't been eating much. He looked older than his 32 years. The kind of older that comes from shame and sleepless nights, not time. The judge, a firm-eyed woman with a gray bun and a voice like gravel, read the charges. Burglary, assault with intent to rob, fraudulent impersonation, 3 counts of theft. Each one landed like a blow to my chest. Darnell didn't flinch. He didn't argue. When asked how he pled, he stood straight and said, "Guilty." Just that one word. And yet it echoed through the room louder than any outburst. The prosecutor made a statement. Then the public defender, a young man with more papers than experience, spoke softly about Darnell's recent steps, the meetings, the confession, the cooperation. He asked the court for leniency, rehabilitation, not punishment. The judge listened, expression unreadable. Then she looked at Darnell. "Mr. Washington," she said, "you have confessed to targeting some of the most vulnerable members of this community, elderly, isolated, trusting. You betrayed that trust." Darnell nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She tapped her pen against the folder. "And yet, you turned yourself in. You faced your family. You didn't run." He looked up, his voice steady. "Because I was raised better than the choices I made." She paused. "I'm sentencing you to 18 months at the Pine Ridge Rehabilitation Center, followed by mandatory community service and parole monitoring. You'll have access to counseling, job placement assistance, and addiction support." There was a small gasp behind me, probably from someone expecting jail time. But my eyes stayed on Darnell. He nodded. No relief, no tears, just quiet acceptance. The gavel came down. That was it. Court adjourned. He turned around once, before the bailiff escorted him through the side door. Our eyes met, and he mouthed, "Thank you." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, held my hand to my heart. Outside, the air was crisp and bright, the kind of day you wish could wrap around you like a second chance. I walked to my car slowly, passing by the Jenkins family near the steps. Mr. Jenkins sat in a wheelchair, face unreadable. Reba stood beside him, holding a file folder. As I passed, she reached out. "Miss Washington," she said quietly. I stopped. "You didn't have to come today." "Yes, I did." She nodded. "You raised a man who stood up. Not many mothers can say that." I looked down. "He's still learning." "Oh, so are we all," she said. I drove home with the windows cracked open. The wind in my ears felt like Henry's voice. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't cry. I went inside, made a pot of coffee, and sat in Darnell's chair at the kitchen table. I wrote in my journal, "Justice is not always the gavel. Sometimes it's the walk up the steps to face it." The days after the sentencing felt like holding my breath underwater. Every morning, I made coffee for one. I still set the second cup out of habit, but by the time it cooled, I'd pour it down the sink, a silent reminder that habits don't vanish as quickly as people do. Darnell was taken to Pine Ridge Rehabilitation Center the same day the gavel fell. A low-security facility tucked into the Georgia pines, where the air was cleaner than the choices that got you there. They called it a second chance program, structured schedules, therapy sessions, work duties, and life skills classes. I sent him a letter every Sunday. Nothing fancy, just updates from home. How Miss Bernice was planting winter pansies. How the Jenkins dog barked at squirrels like they were sworn enemies. How the tomatoes finally broke ground in the garden bed he'd started. Sometimes I'd tuck in a clipping from the paper or a photo of the backyard after rain. I signed each one "Love Ma." He wrote back, "Always neat, always direct. We learned about budgeting this week." I got promoted to kitchen prep. I met a man who reminds me of Henry, but louder. There were no grand revelations, no apologies in every paragraph. Just quiet growth, honest growth. One letter stopped me cold. "Ma, today I helped a man write his first resume. He didn't know what to say about himself. Told me he hadn't worked in 10 years. I asked him what he did every day. "I cook," he said. "For my mama. She's blind." We put down, domestic caregiver, 10 years. He cried when he saw it on paper. I think I understand now why you kept believing in people, even when they gave you nothing back for a while. Sometimes we all forget we're worth putting on the page. Love? Darnell. I cried after that one. Not loud, not dramatic. Just soft tears over a kitchen table that had witnessed too many chapters to count. The community had softened too. Reba Jenkins dropped off a pie on Thanksgiving. It's apple, she said, in case you're tired of sweet potato. She didn't ask about Darnell. I didn't offer. But the pie meant more than words ever could. I started going to the community center again, volunteering for the food pantry, teaching quilting to the younger women. Some of them came in with their own stories, lost sons, divorces, lives rebuilt one stitch at a time. One day, during a quilting session, I looked down at my hands and realized I'd stopped shaking. That Sunday, I visited Pine Ridge. The facility was clean and quiet, full of men who looked older than their ages, like time had weathered them in places the sun couldn't reach. Darnell walked in wearing a plain white shirt and dark pants. He looked good, not polished but healthy, solid, like someone who finally knew what the ground beneath his feet felt like. We hugged brief, tight. He sat across from me at the small metal table. You look good, I said. He smiled. I feel new. Not fixed. Just new. I brought you something. I handed him a journal. On the cover, in gold script, it read, Words Matter. Write in it, I said, even if it's just to yourself. He nodded. I think I might want to work with kids, he said suddenly. The ones who grow up with folks who don't listen. That's a good plan. They listen when they feel seen. You always saw me, even when I hated that you did. We sat there for an hour, talking about nothing and everything. When I left, he walked me to the door. Next time, he said, bring pie. I laughed. You'll get whatever's in season. As I drove home, the radio played an old Sam Cooke song. I rolled down the window, let the wind tangle my hair. A change had come. Not overnight, but surely. The day Darnell came home was colder than expected for a Georgia spring. The dogwoods were in bloom, little bursts of white and pink along the edge of the yard, but the air carried a sharpness. Like even the weather wasn't quite sure how to feel. I stood on the porch, the same place I had watched him walk away from nearly a year ago, my hands wrapped around a mug more for comfort than warmth. The porch swing creaked in the breeze, and in the distance, I heard the low growl of a car engine. Then I saw it. A battered white van pulled up, government-issued, efficient. The kind of vehicle designed to return people to the world like parcels marked, handle with care. Darnell stepped out, a duffel slung over his shoulder. He looked taller. Not in stature, but in presence. Like a man who had rebuilt himself from the inside out. I walked down the steps slowly. He stood at the gate, unsure if he should push it open. You gonna stand there all day or hug your mother? I asked. He smiled. A real one. And then he opened the gate and wrapped me in his arms. We didn't speak for a while, just stood there, breathing. Later, inside, he looked around like he was seeing the house for the first time. You moved the table, he said. Only 2 feet. But yes, it feels different. You're different, I said. So I figured the house should meet you halfway. He sat down and ran his fingers along the grain of the wood. I didn't think I'd ever make it back here. Neither did I. He looked up. But you still kept my room the same. I did, I said. Some things I wasn't ready to change. We spent the afternoon unpacking his bag. He didn't bring much, just a few books, a Bible worn at the edges, and the journal I gave him filled halfway with handwriting. Did you write every day? I asked. Most days, he said. Some pages are just drawings, some just prayers, some are just questions. Those count too. That evening, he offered to cook dinner. He made chicken and dumplings. Said he'd learned it from a guy named Wallace at Pine Ridge, who used to be a chef in Alabama before the bottle took everything but his recipes. We ate at the kitchen table like we used to, quiet, unhurried. After dinner, we sat on the porch again. He looked out at the yard, at the garden beds, waiting for spring's next promise. I want to help at the community center, he said. I asked Reba. She said they're always short on hands. You talked to Reba? Wrote to her? Apologized. And? She wrote back, said she respected the letter, said her daddy's still got some bruises but not just on the outside. I nodded slowly. That's more than I expected. She said she hopes I don't waste my second chance. I turned to him. And will you? He met my gaze. No, ma'am. The stars came out slowly above us, each one like a memory lighting up again. Ma? Yes. Do you think? Maybe one day I could share my story? Like at the center? For the kids? I think, I said, that someone out there is waiting to hear it, and I think it's going to save them. He didn't speak. Just nodded, his eyes shining. That night, I lay in bed and listened, not for footsteps sneaking past, not for sirens, not for the door. I listened for peace. And I heard it. 6 months after Darnell came home, the house had settled into a new rhythm. Mornings started with quiet coffee on the porch, where he'd read from the newspaper or scribble in his journal. Evenings ended with leftovers and low conversation about the day, who needed help at the community center, what crops Miss Dottie was struggling with, or which of the neighborhood kids had started calling him Mr. Washington, like he was some kind of grown-up. He laughed every time they said it, but I knew it meant something to him. Meant he was finally becoming someone he didn't have to run from. One Sunday, Pastor Isaac asked him to share his story during the youth program at the church. He came home afterward looking lighter. I asked how it went. I told the truth, he said, and they stayed in their seats. That night, I found the note card he used, folded inside his journal. All it said was, "Even a broken thing can point to the right path." Spring turned to summer, and the tomatoes came in better than ever. We harvested them together, fingers stained red, arms scratched from the vines, and laughter rising like we hadn't known it for years. Darnell started working part-time at the center, mentoring boys who were teetering at the edge of their own bad decisions. Some of their mamas called me and thanked me. I told them the truth, I hadn't done anything but hold on. But maybe that's what mothering is, holding on when the world says let go, believing in the seed when all you see is dirt. One Saturday, I hosted a neighborhood dinner. Fold-out tables in the yard, paper lanterns strung through the trees, sweet tea and gospel humming from an old speaker. Folks came from every corner, Jenkins, Haney's, Carol's from the library. Even Percy from the pawn shop showed up with a homemade peach cobbler. As the sun dipped low, casting everything in gold, Darnell stood up to say a few words. He thanked everyone for coming, thanked them for giving him a second chance, even if they hadn't said it out loud. And then he looked at me. I was raised by a woman who believed in truth, he said, and when I lost myself, she held that truth up like a mirror. It hurt, but it saved me. I felt the tears, hot and sudden, but I didn't hide them. After the crowd dispersed and the lights came down, he helped me carry the last of the folding chairs inside. At the door, he paused. "You ever think we'd be here?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I hoped." He nodded. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't have to. The silence between us was full, not empty. That night, before I went to bed, I wrote one last entry in my journal. He came back. Not just to the house, but to himself. And I stayed long enough to see it. Justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's a kitchen table, set for two. Sometimes it's a son remembering how to stand. And sometimes it's just a mother who refuses to stop loving.